Okay. Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and discuss these issues with Hoai, which are so important to our industry and all industries. So, Hoai, first of all, just tell us, what is your current role, and what are the sort of core missions of your role now?
Sure. So I'm Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the film organization within NBCU. And essentially our core mission is to work with our leadership to create optimal environments for people to do their best work and to thrive. And this time, during the pandemic, after the Me Too movement, the Great Resignation, we really have leaders' attention with regard to engagement and retention, and it's really been kind of a revolution of really customizing experiences for people, and that's really what equity is, right? That is giving people what they need to thrive.
They spoke of your biography and some of your personal experience. How does your personal history and, as you mentioned, your marriage, your relationship, your personal experience inflect the work that you do at Universal?
Yes,
how do you relate to that?
Yeah. So I came to America as a refugee from the Vietnam War in 1975, and I had the dual experience of being welcomed very graciously and with generosity and with warmth, and as well as the experience of enduring bullying and racism and discrimination. And so I very much feel a sense of responsibility to give back to communities, but I also know what it's like to be an outsider, and I know what it's like to be perceived a certain way based on my race. And so I became very interested in social equity and justice. And I'm married to a black man, and we've been together 30 years, and we're raising a son who's biracial in this country that believes that they are dangerous and threatening and inferior, and I do not accept that. And so I am dedicating my life to really changing narratives. And I fully intended to retire early from the corporate world in order to do this work full time. And that all changed with George Floyd's murder. And what happened was my personal passion of creating social equity and justice collided with the company's mission to create an anti-racist workplace. And all of a sudden, I was in the spotlight, telling our family story of how racism impacts us. And my husband is a special agent, and he's a federal agent for the government, and he is very specially trained. He is a member of a SWAT team, and he's black. And because of his color, wherever he is in the world, his life is potentially threatened. And so we live in Calabasas, and when he drives around the neighborhood, he gets followed by the police. And he is the police, right? And when we go to the store, he'll get followed around because the staff thinks that he's going to steal something. And again, he is the police. And so that's so disheartening. And our son, at a very young age, we had to have the talk with him, right? Which is about police brutality. And how anytime he encounters the police, his only job is to make it home alive, right? And so, we can address any injustices later, but his only job is to make it home alive. And so we have those conversations, and so I started talking about these experiences at work. And then, after COVID, we also had all the crimes that were happening against Asians, and we actually had employees who were impacted by the massacre in Georgia of Asian women. And we also had a colleague impacted by an Asian woman that was pushed in front of a train in New York to her death. And so all of a sudden I was talking about this, and our employees, their eyes were opened. We never really talked openly about racism before at work. And what it created was a sense of compassion because I'm their friend and their colleague, and they started to care. And when you care and when you have compassion, you want to do something to relieve other people's suffering. And so most of the people, because of my role that I'm in front of, are white people, white men, very powerful senior white men. And
Hollywood.
Exactly. And so all of a sudden I had their attention. And because I'm their colleague and their friend, they said, how can I help? What can I do? And the way I approached the work really wasn't in a shaming way or a blaming way. And what they said is that the way you approach the work makes me feel like I can be part of the solution and that I'm not part of the problem.
That's wonderful to hear, and I'd love to hear you're reminding me of just how many horrible events have happened over the last couple of years that affected our families and workplaces. But I know that companies like Universal have really made huge efforts to make diversity and inclusion and equity and compassion, a bigger part of the workplace. And you're talking about the leadership. Is there a corporate structure around, other than people, employees like yourself, is there a corporate structure around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or does it come more from employee resource groups? And how does it get into the Universal culture, and how is it sort of organized?
Yeah, sure. We definitely have a top-down and a bottoms-up approach, and the top-down is from the company overall. We also have in the film organization, we created is something called the Inclusion Committee. And this is a group that has 5 pillars of work. That is culture and belonging, workplace practices, business practices, and partnerships, as well as creative partners and storytelling, because we are a film organization. And the final piece is around social transformation, which is how to create equity and justice in our local communities. And so that's kind of the top down, where we have our business leaders that are leading this work. And so we have the head of marketing, we also had the president of film leading the work in the pillars, and we also have bottoms up. And so we have employee advocacy groups that were created within every division. And so we're kind of meeting in the middle. But I remember how, as an HR team, because of course we're going to be part of this work, but we really wanted it to be led by the business. And so our DI group and HR, we are served as advisors. So we are not leading this. This is led by the business and by our employees. And I remember one day feeling really demoralized, like, oh my gosh, this leader was complaining about how he's expected to do DEI work alongside his regular job. And so I was like, oh my gosh, people really don't care, and so, but then I heard this really heartwarming story, which I want to share with you. And it is to demonstrate how this work is actually embedded in our culture, and that it is owned by leaders and employees. And what happened was that we have a director of film technology, and he had written a note to Donna Langley, who's our chairman. And the subject of the note was, thank you for creating a meaningful culture. And he said, I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I tend to be jaded with regard to ideas like culture. And he said, but I wanted to share this story so that you understand why employees feel pride in working with us. And so he said he was approached by a streaming company, a competitor, and they approached him about a job, and he said, because my leader genuinely believes in my career development, I felt very comfortable going on the interview, which is like, first of all, yay, leader, great job. So he went on the interview, and he said it went normal, par for the course, until they asked him, what questions do you have for us? And he said, I wanted to be prepared. So this company has a very strong image of really believing in DEI and having a commitment to it. So I thought I'd throw a softball and say, how do I, as an employee, contribute to this work? He said, because at Universal, it's become very important to me to drive conversations and efforts regarding DEI and to educate marginalized communities about film technology. And he said that the interviewer was very confused. He was just baffled, like, what kind of question, what do you mean? How do you drive this? We have a DEI department for that. And he said, no, I mean, as an employee, how could I do it alongside my job? And so the leader said, no, that's what our DEI department does. And so he said, well, let me just ask the next person, because I have another interview. And so he went on the second interview, and before he could even ask the question, the second interviewer asked him, because the first interviewer had gotten to her, and she said, do you know what job you're applying for? And he said, yeah, I'm a technologist. And she says, because it seems like you want to work for DEI. And he said, no. In that moment, what he wrote to Donna was, it became very clear to me what culture is. And they were baffled that an employee would expect support from their company to support marginalized communities. And so he said, that's when I understood what culture is, and I expect more of myself because you expect more of me. So I'm happy to report that he's staying with the company, very engaged, and I think the work that we're doing really is meaningful for people, and it's embedded in our culture, so it's not run by us, by HR.
You mentioned to me also earlier, there's some activist pro bono work that the company is involved in outside the company with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, so please tell us about that and how employees get involved with that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So Jeff Shell is our leader, and he is a very disruptive leader, transformative, and he learned about what's called second chance hiring at a conference, and that is giving formerly incarcerated people the opportunity for employment. And what he learned was that this is a population of people who are discarded, really, and when they return to society, they're discriminated against. And the research shows that they're actually very employable, promotable, loyal, hardworking, and because they're discriminated against, they can't contribute to society. And so at the same time, he connected with Scott Budnick, who's the founder of the ARC, and he's a filmmaker. And Scott said, this is the work we're doing with ARC. What they do is, their goal is to end mass incarceration and to reintegrate people into society and to create a more just and equitable system for people. And so Jeff asked us to create an internship program, and we started hiring interns, and we are at a point now where we've hired 17 interns, and we have converted several of them to full-time roles. We have converted them into contractors. And what we're trying to do is to change the narrative between what we know, right, which is the stereotype is that formerly incarcerated people are dangerous and threatening, untouchable, right? And what we're trying to change the narrative to is really hardworking, organized, an important contributor. And we really believe that if employers are not looking at second chance employment, that they're missing the mark on DEI, because this is a group of people that have been severely impacted by systemic racism. And you think about all the trauma that causes people to go to prison. And then when they go to prison, they're traumatized again because they're dehumanized. And then after they leave the system, they're traumatized again because they can't get employment. Mm-hmm. And so we really believe that it's an important part of our work is to help people imagine something different for themselves. And we have so many great success stories, but we had one person who, after he left the system, he started doing labor, physical labor and landscaping work, because that's the work he thought that he could get. And then the ARC connected with him and said, NBCU is offering internships, would you be interested? And he said, of course, right? Because he couldn't imagine he'd ever be able to work in a corporate world. And so he connected with one of our recruiters, and she asked him, what kind of work are you interested in doing? And he said, when I was inside, I took computer science classes, and I would love to do something in technology. And so then our HR team worked with our production IT department and asked them if they would sponsor an intern. And they did, and he is an incredible worker and an important contributor, and we've just been blown away by his work ethic. And it was just this amazing opportunity to help somebody imagine something different for themselves. And then when you think about that ripple effect of a person being successful, and we talk about second chances, but really sometimes it's a first chance for people. And so now he is a full-time employee doing production IT. He's an application developer. And what he said to us is that this was the first time he really felt welcome, somewhere that he belonged and where he can contribute to society. And then his mom looked him in the eye and she said, I really believe that you're not going to go back. I really believe that you have changed. And so we really believe in the ripple effect of this work. We're very proud of it.
It sounds like, yes, very passionate about it. So people who work in storytelling and creative work, I think, feel a unique opportunity and responsibility to be amplifying marginalized voices, telling untold stories. How does this commitment show up in the content, in the films that are coming out?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen, but Donna Langley, our chairman, was appointed a Dame Commander of the British Empire. And part of the work that they recognize is her contribution to society. And so what she's really done as part of her work is to elevate the stories of marginalized people, and then as well as the careers of marginalized people. And so we have a very good history of telling these stories. And some of the examples are straight out of Compton. We did Get Out a couple of years ago. We also did Brokeback Mountain historically. And then more recently, we've released She Said, right, very recently, and that outlines the important work. Thank you. Yeah, we're proud of it. The important work of these journalists, right, and the grit and determination and courage it took to break this story. And She Said wasn't a commercial success, but we really believe that this story will be important for a long time. We also put out Easter Sunday, right, which Joe Coy, right, amazing, so good. And we really believe that we would have a broad audience because family is family. And then Bros was released this summer, and we wanted to really normalize LGBTQ plus relationships. And so I think all of that, commercially, it makes sense. Sometimes, we need the Jurassics and the Minions in order for us to fund these other, culturally significant movies.
I watched Joe Coy's movie on a plane, and it was beautiful and very emotional, and of course you always cry in movies on planes, so I cried. And I'm always happy to see more movies about journalists and the amazing courage of journalists.
Yes.
And Donna, is an incredible leader across Hollywood. We named her at Insider one of the transformative business leaders of the year for this work, and a very successful year in a tough year in the business as well. So speaking of tough years, this is a really important question, I think, for everybody in here, for all of us. We're already seeing it across Hollywood and media and tech and many other companies, hiring freezes and coming cuts, coming layoffs. How do you keep the focus on people and culture at this time? And even more importantly, how do you assure and affirm with employees that you're going to keep the focus? Because I think there's a belief, because historically this was true, that this was one of the first commitments to go, is commitments to DEI, commitments to people become optional in tough times. And obviously that's no longer true in this climate, but how do you message that? How do you keep the priority as we head into what we know is going to be tough 2023?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think when you do this work well, when you do DEI work plus belonging, I think is a critical aspect of the work. It serves everybody. It serves a company because it gives companies a competitive advantage, right? Because diverse teams have been demonstrating that they will give you, creativity and innovation. And when you allow an opportunity for people to really come and thrive, they're going to give you their best work. And so when I think about what is authentic DEI, right, you don't really need a budget for that. What you need are leaders and employees who support the work. So for example, one thing you can do that doesn't cost money is give feedback, right? And so when you think about particularly marginalized communities who may not necessarily had the role models or the opportunities, the only way people get better and develop their skills is to give feedback. And oftentimes I think feedback is uncomfortable for people because they don't want to be deemed sexist or racist, and they give vague feedback and just say, you're doing great, keep doing what you're doing, right? But that doesn't serve anybody, because then you can't get better. And really we want to support people achieving their career ambitions. And so when you give feedback, it really is an act of equity, it's an act of justice. So giving feedback, I think, is a great way. Even thinking about things like running inclusive meetings, right? Who runs them? Who presents? Who's celebrated at these meetings? Are people interrupted? There's research that shows that women of color are the most interrupted in meetings, right? So if you're leading these meetings, really taking that into account. There's so many ways, creating empathy, practicing that. There's so many practical day-to-day ways to implement DEI, and I think we have to because employees expect it, right? They're holding us accountable for it, and so we keep the work going and we make it a priority. And so we have town halls on a regular basis, and Donna, she starts off with what we're doing on DEI. And so if it's a priority for leadership, there are things that you can do every day to contribute to the work.
Well, thank you so much, Hoai. Thank you all for being here, and feedback, yes. Thanks a lot.